Welcome to the European Association for Higher Education Advancement's YouTube and podcast channel. Today, we're diving into a question that's probably on your mind if you're at a crossroads in your career. University degree or vocational training? Which way to go?
Yeah.
Which path should you choose? We're going to do a deep dive using an article from the European Association for Higher Education Advancement. It's called A University Degree or Vocational Training. Which one is the best? Hopefully we can help you figure out what's best for you.
It's a huge decision. But what's interesting is it's not as straightforward as it used to be. This article highlights how the lines between those two paths are kind of getting blurred.
Okay.
So
let's break it down first. What exactly are we talking about when we say university versus vocational training?
good point. Let's define our terms. The article explains it pretty clearly. University education is your classic academic route. Think bachelor's, master's, doctorates. It's about deep diving into theory and knowledge. You're probably picturing fields like medicine, law, architecture, professions that need that solid theoretical background.
Right. You're not going to be doing brain surgery based on like a quick online course. You need years of intense study.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, vocational training is much more about practical skills. Think learning a trade, plumbing, electrical work, or even web development, graphic design. It's all about that hands-on experience.
So less hitting the books
Yeah,
and more actually doing the thing.
precisely. And that's why it often is a faster route to entering the workforce. The article mentions things like IT, tourism, healthcare support roles, even business skills, all those areas where practical know-how is really valuable.
Now, this is where it gets interesting to me. The article points out that it's not always black and white. There's some overlap starting to happen.
Absolutely. We see more and more institutions offering both university degrees and vocational training.
Though it's not necessarily an either situation anymore.
Not at all. And that reflects a bigger trend. The world is realizing that well-rounded education is more valuable now than ever. Even universities are starting to include those practical hands-on elements. Like the article gives an example of medical schools. They now include vocational training in things like patient interaction and staff management.
Yeah, makes sense. A surgeon who can't communicate with their patients.
Well,
That doesn't really help anyone.
exactly. And that brings us to the question of what are the pros and cons of each path? It's not just the type of learning, but what you get out of it.
Okay, let's get into that. So what about a university degree?
Well, the article highlights the potential to earn more in certain fields, but it also says it's a much longer commitment. Years in school, student debt. And you might not have job-ready skills right when you graduate.
That's a good point. You might have all this knowledge, but not really know how to apply it in the real world.
Yeah.
So what about vocational training?
Vocational training gets you job-ready much faster, often with less debt. It's more flexible, which is good for people changing careers or going back to school later, but it's important to keep in mind that it might not be enough for those really specialized professions where you absolutely need that deeper theoretical background.
So it all depends on your goals, right? Are you aiming for a really specific, highly specialized career? Or do you want to get into the workforce quickly with practical skills?
Exactly. And it's great that the article points out how vocational training is getting more respect. Employers are seeing how valuable it is. It's not seen as that second best option anymore.
Why do you think that is? What's driving that change?
Well, I think it's a few things. One is the rising demand for skilled tradespeople. We need plumbers, electricians, mechanics. The world wouldn't work without them.
Yeah, it's true. And I feel like those jobs used to be overlooked, like they weren't as prestigious.
Right. But luckily, that's changing. And it's not just the traditional trades either. Look at all the new skilled jobs in areas like renewable energy, cybersecurity, robotics even. Those fields need people with specialized training you often find in vocational settings, not a typical university.
So what does the article say for someone deciding between these two paths?
It comes down to really getting to know yourself and your options. The article stresses figuring out what excites you. What are you good at? What are your strengths, your passions?
Right, because if you hate your job, it won't matter how much you're making. You won't be happy.
Exactly. And then the article says really dive into your options. Don't just go off what you think you know about different careers. Talk to people actually doing the work. Maybe shadow them for a day. Get a real perspective on what it's actually like.
I love that the article says to think outside the box. Say you're interested in something that usually needs a university degree, but you want to get hands-on experience too. Could you combine those?
Definitely. The lines are getting blurry, and that opens up so many possibilities. The article even mentions how universities are bringing in those vocational elements more and more, so you might find that perfect mix without choosing just one path.
It's all about finding where what you love, what you're good at, and what the world needs all come together.
Hmm.
That's always changing, isn't it? I mean, the job market's constantly shifting.
Very true. That's why the article makes it clear that this isn't a one-time decision. It's about lifelong learning, being adaptable, and knowing you might change careers several times in your life. That's becoming the norm, actually.
So it's not picking the right path. It's more like developing skills to handle any path.
You got it. And that leads us perfectly to the final question from the article, which I find really interesting. If this merging of university and vocational training keeps going, what will it mean for education's future? How will it change learning and preparing for careers?
Wow, that's a big one. What do you think? Any predictions?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but I think we'll see more of those hybrid programs that combine the best of both worlds. You know, that academic rigor of a university degree with the hands-on training from vocational programs.
So you're thinking like a degree in, say, engineering, but with internships built in, or apprenticeships where you're actually using what you learn in the real world.
Exactly. And I think employers will start looking for that combo of skills and knowledge. They want people who can think critically, problem solve, but also aren't afraid to get their hands dirty.
It's like that old book smarts versus street smarts thing. But instead of seeing them as separate, we realize the power of having both.
I think that's a great way to put it. And honestly, it's exciting. This could lead to more customized learning where people can tailor their education to their own interests and goals.
So instead of everyone on the same rigid path, we might see people making their own educational menus, picking and choosing courses and experiences that fit their passions and the skills they need.
Right. Imagine education that's truly personalized, where you're not just being fed information, but you're shaping your own learning journey.
I love that. It feels way more empowering and engaging. And who knows what tech will do? Maybe even more VR simulations or AI learning tools that blur the lines between the classroom and reality.
It's wild to think about all the possibilities. But at the end of the day, the big takeaway from this article and our chat today is that there's no single right path anymore.
It's about being proactive, doing your research, and most importantly, knowing yourself, your strengths, your passions, your goals, and being okay with those things changing as you go.
Definitely. It's about lifelong learning, adapting, and always being curious.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We've looked at how education is changing, debunked some myths about university versus vocational training, and hopefully given you some new ideas about how to navigate your own educational journey.
If you're trying to make this decision, remember there's no need to stress. Just embrace the process, do your research, talk to people, and most importantly, trust your gut.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And please don't forget to follow the European Association for Higher Education Advancement on YouTube and social media.